Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Hoda Abdelhai, and I head up the portfolio of HR and talent events at Informa. We are just waiting for a few people to log in, so if you can give us a couple of minutes, and we're about to start. Okay, I think we are ready to go. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today's webinar's topic is the future of HR work, digital nomadism, and remote working. Today's webinar is going to be presented by Frederick Henschens. He's the organizational design advisor and design thinker at Boxology. Fred helps delegates and attendees understand how digital disruption, people centricity, value networks, and workplace platforms can help you build a more agile organization. He basically helps you design your organization of the future today. Before we move on, I would like to just cover a few housekeeping points. Today's webinar is going to be recorded. We will be able to share a link with you after the event is complete at a week from now. And so we welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with colleagues. We also invite your comments and questions. Please look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think a question for the speaker at any point, just type it in there, and in the last 15 minutes of the webinar, we'll pose it to Fred to answer a couple of questions depending on time available. Fred is also a speaker at our flagship event, the HR Summit and Expo, that's taking place between the 4th and the 6th of November at the Dubai Exhibition Center in Dubai. We're offering an exclusive discount for the attendees of this webinar to attend the summit. We'll share more information about that post-event in the same email where we share the recording. But if you have any questions at all, please put them in and we're happy to assist. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to Fred, and I'll turn it over to Frederick to start the webinar.
Thank you, Hoda. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. Shall we start the presentation? Yes. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, my name is Frederick Henschens indeed. I'm a design thinker and organizational design advisor. I would like to start by pointing out that this topic, remote work, and especially for HR, can be a little awkward at times. This topic means a lot to me and is very close to my heart. By the end of this presentation, I hope this topic will hopefully also mean a lot to you as well. Some compare this topic with like bringing up politics during a Christmas or an Eid dinner. The topic that we'll be discussing today is remote work for HR professionals. We are living in a world where our employees are asking to work remotely. Remote work is the dream, but for some companies, the notion is more like a nightmare. A light bulb goes off one day for an employee, and then he thinks, hey, I want to work remotely too. So they visit their HR manager or their boss, their manager, and say, I want to start working remotely. So to which the response tends to be, our company has a very specific way of doing things. Remote work might be the right way for some companies. It's not the right one for us. Well, many employees encounter this response when asking to work remotely, and usually results also in disappointment on behalf of the individual employee in question. So disappointment leads to reduced productivity and many other things. Disappointment increases also the amount of stress and the workload on management, just to answer very, I would say, awkward questions like this, or questions they're not used to actually respond or have a response on. All of a sudden, you have an employee whose output isn't as strong as it should be. Management begins to question their own decisions and then starts to Google stuff. And then it starts, of course. That's why sometimes we realize that people like us exist, remote workers, and especially HR remote workers. So what are we talking about when we say remote work? Is it magic? Is it like unicorns and rainbows that just occur on very special occasions? People doing their job from a beautiful beach. Well, it happens. We often think about Bali. That's what some people believe that I'm saying when they start Googling stuff. Yeah. When you first get into this thing, you quickly come across a very specific statistic. 50% of the workforce is going to be working remotely by the end of next year. Well, hang on a second. I'm not working remotely. Is that guy working remotely? Is he? No. So these are often questions that we ask ourselves. So there goes the 50% statistic, right? I know for a fact half of us aren't working remotely. I mean, half of the people saying they work remotely are essentially, well, not working remotely as we think they should be remote working. So what is remote working? That's the question we will get to ask ourselves. Global Workforce Workplace Analytics are basically the leading authority on remote work research. When doing some research for this presentation, this webinar, I can tell you that I found good news. We're on our way to seeing 50% of the workforce work remotely by the end of next year. Surprises you, right? Me too. Because at the moment, we are at 49%, they say. And I must see that many people actually still don't work remotely. Is it because we have an understanding or a definition different from what it actually means remote working and digital nomadism? Well, in my view, I could say I'm proudly to say I'm a remote worker. And I think I'm only 3.2% of the working force that is working remotely today in a legal fashion, because that's what I want to highlight on, is that actually 46.8% of the remote workers actually accidentally may, without even knowing it, not actually remote working, legally said. Yeah, they might be just out of a job and do some freelance work in a cafe, at Starbucks, or at any other location. So there is where actual definition of remote work becomes important. Huh? If you're offsite at a location that isn't a co-located office environment, you're remote. Let's be clear on that. If you have your laptop on your cell phone or your cell phone within reach right now, you're remote too, right? Now you can check your emails while you're at the desk or in a cafe and you were supposed to be in the office. So we're actually all remote, but some of us are doing it the wrong way. So there's always significant room for improvement. We are clear on that. No matter what you're doing, as HR professionals, you can start working remotely. Nothing facilitates progress quite like new information paired with a fresh perspective. So when I talk about the aspects of remote work, when your employees or you as an employee aren't doing remote work intentionally, then that means they're doing it wrong. If you're an HR manager listening to this webinar and you're being reactive, you're doing it wrong as well. Here's a basic example. One of your employees says, hey, I want to work remotely. So what do you say? You go, okay, all right, I like that idea. Take your laptop, go home, and take your work with you. That's being reactive, which creates a lot of problems for companies. Studies have shown that doing remote work the wrong way simply isn't sustainable. Yeah, and there's a big example for that, IBM. IBM fell into that immediately. Being a good example globally to be supporting remote work, they were the first ones not so long ago actually asking all their employees to come back. It happened to Yahoo as well, neither a unique case. So 15 years in this field, used to be a manager, a professional consultant, and for 20 years an organizational design professional. I can tell you, I think this stuff all the time, and there's quite some problems related to remote work and how we actually deal with it today. I do what I do and I say what I say, and when you say there's landmines rising right around us when you talk about remote working, I can tell you there's quite a few. So you might be thinking when listening to me now, if we go remote with our employees, we want to do it right. Okay, so that's great. So you're still tuned with 53 attendees in this webinar, because that's what we're going to talk about a bit in a few minutes. So we need to know about problems standing between your company or yourself as a remote worker and your policies. We call these particular problems excuses. Sorry for the word. But that's what it is. Yeah, we've already identified the fact that there's a right way and a wrong way of doing things when we talk about remote working. The way you think about remote work may affect your ability to see its potential. That's for sure. Excuses and fears affecting the implementation of remote work policies at your company are there. I want to try to turn those same excuses and fears into functional insights in this webinar. So, when remote workers are saying to be alone or remote workers are lonely, a common excuse among people in managerial positions. I don't want to be responsible for nurturing a workforce of hermits, we're saying. It's too much work. So remote workers are lonely is a statement that often comes to the desk of companies and people who are thinking about being remote workers. We're going to keep people socially connected within the confines of an office. That's our aim. We really want people to work together and stay in an office so they can socialize. It works, and sometimes it's fun, to be honest. Yeah, I like that too. It can be demanding as well, right? But no one's ever lonely at work, right? Besides, remote jobs are only in tech industry. Well, not only Silicon Valley and SaaS things, but also HR. We're in a creative healthcare industry, so probably it won't work for us. Well, both represent a specific way of thinking indicative of the first mistake companies make. So, what I'm saying here is that companies should nurture a workforce of hermits. No, I didn't do that. There's a fundamental difference between social and professional isolation. That difference matters. Difference between going home and being alone all day while working offsite, no access to intellectual resources or friendships with colleagues that you can build up with co-workers. Well, remote workers don't become weirdos who skip showers and won't leave their house, okay? The average remote worker is going to miss the social aspects of working in an office, that's for sure. But being around your colleagues can be awesome. Yes, that's true. Not having that can be a problem, also true. So this is where the definition of professional isolation comes in. Every single one of us want to feel like we're part of something. When drafting remote work policies, ensure that your employees won't lose that feeling. That's my keynote, my key message, my first key message here. So, preventing isolation with channels. How do we successfully prevent professional isolation from affecting our remote workers? Well, the answer is channels. Channels of communication supporting and recognizing the value of our remote workers. We need, as HR professionals, to make sure that our remote workers feel like they're still a part of the team. And if you are an HR professional in recruiting, doing search and recruiting, onboarding, or any other activities off-site in a remote working environment, you need these channels. The best way of doing that is by keeping our remote workers both connected and integrated. If we do that one thing correctly, we prevent professional isolation from ever taking place. So that's why I was saying my first point is isolation. So the second thing, going remote is all or nothing. Well, that's what we hear. That's a second excuse. Yeah? If we try to implement it in our company, we often say it's probably going to take several years. That's often the excuse we hear. Implementing remote work policies from scratch doesn't make any sense to me. That's another thing that I sometimes hear from HR colleagues. You might be telling yourself that remote work isn't the status quo for a reason. Yeah, it's something you do when you're on parental leave, for example, or right after you've had a surgery. Well, which brings us to the second excuse. A remote job isn't a real job. This particular excuse is also prevalent in the world of remote work advocacy. It might be an executive who works remotely these days, but I used to have a real job. That's what they sometimes hear saying. People say, well, you know, they go freelance. Well, that's because it's an excuse to say they don't have a job. So that's what we often hear. So there's a stigma we create. Getting someone to openly discuss remote work can be pretty exotic and really an interesting challenge. I want to examine what I've come to call the secrecy of the world of remote workers. Are you still tuned? I think so. There's more people coming into this webinar. Thank you. So the secrecy of remote work. Now we're coming to the juicy part. 46% of the digital workforce is currently working remotely, working from wherever their clients are and attending more conferences than ever before. Well, I'm one of them. I feel it's safe to say that their work is benefiting heavily as a result of it. However, interesting enough is that the same 46% doesn't call what they do remote work. Calling something remote work is sometimes considered a trendy kind of thing, and we might be scared about that. So it's something that, by virtue of existence, might poorly reflect upon management. Most of the 46% I'm just talking about call themselves flexible professionals who travel as part of their job. It's a good way to cover it up. Being a remote worker is like having a secret that you either can't or don't want to share. This is another part where things get fascinating for someone like me. When an employee keeps their remote work a secret and there's no policy update, there's no relevant paperwork. It migrates the employee into a realm of illegal work, it seems. The good news is that no one's going to jail or getting into trouble for it. Well, there we go. Most legislators and politicians aren't even aware of the world of remote workers, and that's also bad news for those who collect taxes. When they eventually realize what's happening, legalization won't be too far behind, and I expect something happening very soon. So, preventing secrecy, yeah? So let's take a moment to ask the question, how do we prevent secrecy? Well, by cultivating and encouraging a culture of open debate and transparency. Most of us are already remote workers, whether we like it or not. We work in our cars when we're stuck in traffic, we work on the train and during flights. Even my wife is working when holding a baby. We answer work-related emails at home because we don't want to lag behind. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it at all. Yeah? Let's talk about admitting that people are working remotely and then embrace it. Remote work isn't something to be afraid of. It's awesome. Acknowledge the fact. I mean, that's how we become a part of the future as opposed to staying stuck in the past. Remote work allows people to adjust the balance of their private and professional lives. That's what all companies should strive for as part of their remote work policies. A company's remote work policy should be also seek to address every worst case scenario. Imagine giving your employees the option to do their work from their local Starbucks. Why not? Free internet, iced coffee, and cookies. Hey, total freedom. It sounds amazing, right? I'm in. It will be until there is a security breach because your employee was using public Wi-Fi. And there we go. So there's no single answer as to the question of how you make it work. That's what your team is for, and that's why I'm here talking about it today. So, our productivity is confirmed by supervision. I want my team close by in case I need them. Oh, didn't we hear that before? That makes sense, right? Well, for some of us, for sure. It's one of the main mantras of any successful manager. Because when we're in our office, we see Mohammed and we see Cheng and Becky. We see that they're doing their job. Everything's working the way it's supposed to. Why change it now? We ask ourselves. Well, some ask that question, and I'd say that way of thinking can excessively limit your perspective in this particular topic of remote working, specifically by putting you into a familiar box where you're always comfortable. When someone tries to leave that box, you automatically get concerned. It won't be able to see, hear them anymore. Imagine, I can't now know where they are at any times. That's a fear that the managers have. There's no way for me to know whether they're being productive or not. These are really the fears that that managers have. Well, micromanagement, that's how we call this. That box is actually pretty famous, yeah, to the point where it has a name, and you call it micromanagement. We should all try to prevent micromanagement in our professional lives. We should strive to maintain a culture based on trust within our prospective companies. The best way to do that is called measurement. So, humor me for a second and just think about your car. Say you hire someone to clean it. Do you ever need to watch them to do it in order to know that they did their job? Just think about it. Do you ever need to know whether it was cleaned in a garage or in a parking lot? Does it make any difference to you when the car was cleaned, morning 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock? For most of us, the answer to all of those questions above would be no. When we pick up our car and it's clean, we're officially done. It's a wrap, the end. That's it. I'm proposing that the same logic should be applied to our respective teams. It's a doorway that always leads to success. I've seen it happen time and time again, and in my organizational design work, and we talk about agility, that's what we're talking about. It is really all that hard to imagine yourself saying, you know what, let's update our KPI. Let's base our KPI solely on results. And here we go. If you're producing what we expect from you, why would I care where do you do your job? Are you agreeing with me? Why would I care where or when you work? If the results are what they are, that's great. Remote work doesn't have to be complicated, right? A lot of it is actually has to do with letting go of old-fashioned perspectives. So work at home will get interrupted by dogs and laundry, which is absolutely true. I hate it. Actually, as a remote worker, I have an actual office, not home, because I was tired of my bird calling my name every time I was shuffling in my chair. Cats and video games, especially my kids, should be in there as well. It happens. Is that really a problem? Well, actually, I don't know. I mean, that's up to you. I want my team close by in case I need them. This is an old slide. My apologies. So, I'd like to briefly mention the topic burnout, which is a fascinating topic to me, although I'm still a young guy. When you go and you say, I only care about your results, work from wherever, whenever you want. Well, you're in for a surprise. People start working all the time. Fact is stranger than fiction. And here, while managers look around for excuses, remote workers end up working too much. That's obviously a pretty good problem to have, right? However, it's still a problem. Remote workers lack geographical boundaries, but it certainly needs to have logical ones. To prevent burnout, we need to create a sense of structure through policy. We have to create a schedule as to when our remote workers can and cannot work, because we care about the people who make our companies work, right? There's no debate or other side to be had on this topic. I really want to close it with a very simple slide where I'm saying, if we do all of these things that I've been talking about correctly, if we dedicate ourselves to successfully solving the problems that are out here and out there, remote work doesn't have to be a nightmare. It might have once been. Also, that particular goal is both entirely realistic and attainable for every single one of us. When realized, remote work isn't remote work versus co-located work anymore. It's not physical offices versus virtual offices. It's just work. Work becomes not a place where we go, but something that we do in a way that works well for all of us. So with this, I'd like to also highlight that I have a book that is actually driving around the same topic, which is called HR Nomads and how to become part of the first generation of HR digital workers. I'd like also to use the last few minutes of this presentation to actually also highlight the importance of thinking and talking about remote working, especially in terms of future generations that coming into the workspace, existing generations of young professionals. We have seen already companies in Saudi as well as in Dubai starting to really have remote working in their policies. And what we notice is that those policies actually replace more and more policies that now today are of time and attendance and leave requests and so on and so on. So I'd be interested to definitely hear more from you on this topic. And if you have any questions, I'd like to pick them up now. If there is any for them, I still have it around 20 minutes for this topic. Hoda?
Yes, actually, we do have a couple of questions. So we have a question from Saeed Kasim and a question from Karina Bagley. I hope I'm pronouncing those names right. So both questions are actually leading towards the same thing. So I'm just going to read them out. They talk about productivity for remote workers. So how can employees be monitored? how will the productivity be measured to those who work remotely? And is there any better way to ensure high productivity for remote workers? And I think Kirina also kind of leads to the same question, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So, just a few minutes ago, what I highlighted is very important that we focus on results and know how we do work, but that we do the actual work and it has a result. I think the KPI is more focused on the results than on the way we do work. It will also say that it's important to embed also a policy where we also put clear that when remote workers work. Myself, I have been through my design company hiring remote workers, and I always made sure that people know when to work and when not to work. And it's very simple. We have office hours, and somehow we'd like to be connected during these office hours more than, for example, in our weekends. And that also helps with productivity because a good work-life balance is not just for people sitting physically into an office, but it's also very important for those who work remotely. We see always this picture of remote workers with their laptop in their shorts at the beach, probably near a cocktail bar, playing Bob Marley in the background. But the reality is that these people are actually working 12 to 16 hours. And that's a luxury, maybe, on one hand, that you have enough work. But on the other hand, it's when I mentioned the aspect of burnout, it's very important that as companies, as HR professionals, or if you are a remote worker, to build in that in your contracts. If you are a remote worker listening in, it's important that you ensure that you have that work balance calculated into your schedule of work.
Mm. Yeah, we have a second question from Agnes, also talking about the same topic of it was just kind of more of a comment and what your thoughts are. So she was saying, don't you think working from home or from a place that is not necessarily the office space, will make a person too relaxed and might yield less productivity?
Yeah, I'm sure that, and that's one of the points I made as well in my presentation. It's very important that you make up your own mind as a remote worker. I gave the example of video games and dogs barking and cats meowing in my back. Remote working can happen in a Starbucks cafe, can be happening at your home. That you want to be relaxed, well, I can see that same issue happening in offices. People really are very satisfied with their work, but definitely not necessarily engaged in the work they're doing and being productive. I think it is more about behavior and mentality and thinking about how you see work and the work ethics around that. They apply as well for remote workers as they apply for people working physically in an office, a 9-to-5 job. There is no difference. I think it sits with the actual aptitude of the individual who wants to be a remote worker or is a remote worker due to circumstances, to actually have that discipline. Discipline is, we're not taking away the aspect of work discipline the moment you become a remote worker. If you feel that you cannot have that discipline and you need to be physically in an office, I think there still should be an opportunity for people to do that. I'm not saying to replace all the physical office 9-to-5 jobs into remote workers, but I'm saying to incorporate that option, that flexibility as a company to offer remote work and think about remote working policies and implement these. So you have that flexibility for your employees to choose if they want to work in that. And the KPIs therefore will be focused on results, not necessarily the way we work.
Fantastic. I do want to remind everyone that we are accepting questions right now. So if anyone has any questions on any other areas or subjects that that Fred has discussed during his presentation, please do send them across. We have one question from Cindian. He's asking, how do you believe that this trend of remote working and flexi hours will affect work-life balance?
Well, as I said, it's in an uncontrolled environment without policies and without actually some guidance for remote workers in organizing themselves. And, you know, technology is the first one coming to my mind, helping remote workers. There's a lot of apps and applications existing nowadays from doing your accounting, time management, and other planning, contracts and proposals, all can be done from a laptop on a beach table. And so technologies are there and available, but you need to use them, of course, and one. And second is then also the discipline, as I said. On one hand, as a remote worker, you can put part of your contract or engagement. There is a time to work and there's a time to enjoy life, basically. I always surprised that I would find, and I've met them, people going to Thailand and to Vietnam and be remote workers, or in Bali, and then end up working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. I'm like, why in the first place you went to Bali? Is also to enjoy the beach, right, and the jungle and nature. That's what the perks of being a remote worker. You can do that. Now, if you take that away from your own life, then there's definitely no balance with your work. Then you need definitely to rethink it. But also companies need to be proactive to offer that to their employees and need to put that into their policies. They need to think about not just the timesheets, but also when people are working, when people should be free. Like we force people to take their annual leaves. The same way, you need to say remote workers, today is not a working day. I'm not expecting a call, neither a message. I will not read it. That's not today. That's tomorrow. And I think, but also is important that we think about the information security issues. I briefed it only partially and briefly, but it's also important we think about how we deal with remote working versus using public Wi-Fi's or clouds, Google Drives and stuff like that. I mean, how do we get access and how do we get access through and to these shared folders on cloud applications? That is often a question from HR information security point of view that needs to be taken care of as well. I just want to add that to the conversation.
Fantastic. We are getting a few questions rolling in here, so this is great. Thank you to everyone. We're gonna try to see if we can get them all, but if not, I do want to remind everyone that Fred will be speaking and at the HR Summit in November. So whoever is in the region, we will share more information post the event. So we'll answer a couple more questions over the next 12 minutes up until 5. So we have a question from Jesse. She's asking, or he, could you share what criteria you have used to determine whether remote work is viable?
When it's viable, you mean in terms of like the type of work or the conditions for work? Is there? I'm not clear. If we talk about the types of work, I think, as I mentioned, remote work is not a job that is solely done individually and like a hermit sitting on a big stone somewhere on a mountain alone. We need to use the current existing technologies, and there are so many, and we use them every day from morning to night on communication. So communication channels really makes it that we work together, and therefore a lot of work can be done remotely, more and more. And it's not just limited to tech recruiters or app developers or graphic designers. More and more, I can say, for example, when I talk about HR Nomad, I'm thinking about compensation benefit specialists, organizational design and development specialists, leadership developers, coaches, even online coaching comes more and more onto the agenda. So there's so much opportunities for so many different roles within the HR. That through communication channels, a lot of can be done through remote work, which doesn't take away that often we also want to have that face-to-face. Even myself, I could not imagine only being remote working. That's why I'm so happy that we have great conferences like the one of HRSE, which connects you to so many people and brings you all together. So is it viable? I think so. There's also from an economic perspective, a lot of opportunities. First of all, it reduces cost for employers. In 2018, I think there was around $5 billion of cost saving only in US companies, based on stats from the PSGI News. It also reduces cost for workers. Remote workers can save up to $7,000 a year on average, according to the remote worker stats figures of Telca. I'm just giving you a few numbers. So, and then of course the indirect costs, it reduces stress. But of course, not if you work 7 days a week, 12 hours, and you see people enjoying the beach while you're actually behind the glass. But definitely, I would say at least people working from home at least once a month are around 25% more likely to report feeling happier. That's statistics again. But I can convey to that. The aspect of freedom makes also people more happy, and also it can help close the gender gap in technology. By the way, I mean, some 75% of women that surveyed in the same surveys I just mentioned work in technology say that remote working gives them much more opportunities. So even in industries and in areas in the regions in the world where there's still a large gender gap, remote working actually closes that. So I think viable, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, noted. So I think there's we have a question here on from I believe his name is Gemba, and it's the question is for services industries like banks that information security is priority. Achieving a remote working platform or framework would be a huge task for some departments. How do you handle that? And I want to kind of tie in that question with another question that we got from Saeed initially in terms of financial institutions. So he was asking any idea what the successful rates of remote working in financial institutions? Is there a best practice an organization can mimic?
Yes, definitely. I mean, this is actually a topic on itself, but definitely the answer is remote work policies to start with. So, for example, remote work policies definitely should encompass the agreements between the employee and how he works and what type of connections he can use. I'm not an IT specialist, but I can tell you that first of all, the choice of workspace, not just have to be quiet and distraction free, but also you should have an internet connection that's adequate and that is for eventually provided by the company through the classic telecom packages that are available in all the countries nowadays. It should also give adherence to the break and attendance schedules that I just mentioned. There are a few things on compliance, of course, attendance, the use of social media, confidentiality of information. For example, I have a laptop with a screen protection. If you look on my laptop, I need to sit in front of it to see something. So definitely there's an aspect of data protection, which I would invite information security and cybersecurity specialists to contribute to in these policies. Also, employee code of conduct, anti-discrimination, dress code. Well, interesting. Dress code plays a role as well. I mean, if you do conference calls with video calling, you don't want to sit in a Bermuda shirt with a cocktail next of you. I mean, so there's even dress code. And I think also in terms of compensation, equipment used. I mean, how do you store and keep your equipment, passport protection, data encryption that you can apply, protection standards. I just continue thinking of topics that needs to be in the remote working policy. So my thought is on this that definitely we'll be here to happy to assist to develop remote working policies for you as a bank if this question comes from a bank HR manager. And definitely think about working on this remote working policies. There are a few online available for templates, but involve your compliance and your information security and IT colleagues, and definitely work out a great remote working policy for your employees.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you, Fred, for that answer. So I think we have, I'm just going to take a kind of a couple more questions. We have a question here from Noor Hamoudi. After remote working, would some HR roles be canceled, like training and development, for example? And I want to tie that question in with Donia's question, who asks how many days per month or week can HR work from home, in your opinion, without disrupting the company?
Yeah, so that depends on type of industry, type of role, and also the responsibility of the role in relation. Is it an individual contributor or a managerial position? But I would say in general, what I see, especially in this part of the world, like for example, Saudi Telecom has introduced remote working. to their employees, and they limit that to I think one or 2 days a month, and a total of 14 days a year or something like that. It was published on LinkedIn a 2 or 3 weeks ago. As I always advise companies to, first of all, as I said, have a remote working policy, and then introduce this gently into the organization, like we introduced variable pay or performance management. It's not a big bang. There's a culture change happening for both the employee as for the company. But I definitely would invite organizations to do a pilot, design, think about how you can introduce that as an employee-centric service, or as an employee service for where people can actually benefit from, and take this in a positive way, and definitely increase productivity, because that's one of the things. It's astonishing how much more productivity it creates with employees, allowing them full day work home a week, for example. It's astonishing. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Fred, for this answer. I think that's pretty much it. It wraps up the questions for the day. Wanted to thank you, Fred, once again, and for all the attendees for today. I want to remind everyone that we will be sharing the recording for this webinar with everyone next week, and more information on how to register for HR Summit. Fred is going to be there. He's going to be delivering a session, and he's going to also have a book signing around his book that he was just talking about earlier. So we'd love to see everyone there. Let me know if you have any feedback or any comments at all. Please reach out to us directly, and happy to help. Have a good evening and afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.